This evening. I want to acknowledge Marina Sapir, who's our Chair of Adult Education. Thank you for helping organize tonight. Co-chair assisting Sam Stroker. It's really wonderful to be in person, to have a lecture after a very challenging time. Not only be in person, but I want everyone to smile. I want to see all your smiling faces. We've missed that for a while, so it's really wonderful. Also want to acknowledge Toby Schaefer for her leadership in the synagogue, deeply devoted always to education programs. Thank you very much. Tonight is really a night that reflects in many ways an important principle of Judaism, which is Binu Shnot Dor Vador, Sha'alavi Chavi Adetcha, Zekenecha V'Yomulach, which means in English, Moshe Rabbeinu at the very end of his life speaks about the importance of looking into history, understanding what we can learn, looking at different individuals, and being inspired by their leadership. We are only here today, not only as members of Agudat Shalom, but really as a Jewish people because of others that have come before us and invested in the future of the Jewish people, made significant choices. And tonight we have the opportunity to go back in time a little bit to learn about Rabbi Herschel Schacter. I'll be giving a formal introduction to our speakers this evening, Dr. Rafael Medoff and Rabbi J.J. Schacter. But it's really an honor for us to have both of you here tonight. They had a good sampling of fine 613 cuisine. And welcome to our newly renovated shul. This is also kind of a major event having you here too. So it's wonderful to sanctify this time and space. So with you, and particularly as you learn Rabbi Herschel Schachter's connection to Agudat Shalom. It's not often they have an opportunity to speak in the shul where your father, blessed memory, served as a rabbi too. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Rafael Medoff. Make sure to say not Medoff, please. Medoff, I just want to make that very clear. He's going to show a little video, then I'll formally introduce him and introduce Rabbi Schacter. But he wants to first show a video. I'll turn it on. Can I turn it on? No, not for you. How you go for it.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody. Thank you, Rabbis Cohen and Kurtz, and thank you to the President and the Education Committee for making it possible for Rabbi Schacter and myself to join you this evening. Before my remarks and before Rabbi J.J. Schachter's remarks, we want to play for you a brief clip. I apologize for the jarring image. You'll understand in a moment why that's at the beginning of this. We're going to show you it's a 4-minute audio visual with Rabbi Herschel Schacter speaking about what he saw when he entered Buchenwald on the day of its liberation in 1945. The title of my new book, The Rabbi of Buchenwald, points to the fact that the experience that Herschel Schacter had in that liberated Nazi concentration camp shaped and guided his life in the years to follow. because Rabbi Herschel Schacter is so well known as an extraordinarily gifted speaker, we felt it was important for you to hear his actual voice and get a kind of a feeling of what it was like to hear Rabbi Schacter and to hear him describe what he actually experienced. So we're going to show you this 4-minute clip. The images that accompany him speaking, you're not going to see him in this, it's an audio clip of him speaking, but the images are snapshots which I discovered in his papers. When I began working the research for this book, I had access to boxes of files of Rabbi Herschel Schachter's personal papers that had been in the Schacter family's attic, literally. By the way, this is a historian's dream come true. That yes, you got all that great stuff and it's still in the attic. In those files, I found a group of snapshots, little Polaroids, unidentified, and there's no indication in any of the vast correspondence or other documentation that I had at my disposal to indicate what they are, but it seems clear to me these snapshots were taken, and they've never before been published, by the way, that they were taken by either Rabbi Schacter or more likely by his assistant, because you'll see Rabbi Schacter in some of these photos, during those first hours after the liberation of Buchenwald. So we're going to hear his voice, we're going to see images of what he was seeing on that fateful day, and then you'll hear from his son, Rabbi J.J. Schacter, and then I will have the opportunity to share some thoughts with you, and then we'll have time at the end for questions. And there are some copies of the book available for sale, and we'll be glad to sit and sign them for anyone who's interested. So, if you would please start the clip.
I served with frontline troops across Europe, and then, precisely on that day, came upon the infamous, notorious Buchenwald concentration camp. I had heard nothing of Buchenwald until that day. It was only my sad experience to have seen, to have participated in the ravages of war, to have seen cities laid waste and homes destroyed and human beings crushed. But especially do I consider it a privilege, tragic and grievous though it was, to have come face to face with the stark, bitter, sordid reality of Jewish tragedy. As I mentioned a moment ago, I came upon this hellhole called Buchenwald within a matter of hours after the first columns of American tanks rode through and liberated that dungeon on the face of this earth. I do indeed consider it a privilege, tragic, sad, to have been among those who literally opened the gates of hell, the crematoria. I saw hundreds of human bodies strewn in front of the ovens that were still hot, the smoke still curling upward, waiting to be shoveled into the furnaces. How can any human being ever forget such a sight? I stood there in front of those hot ovens, my eyes riveted to that view. I must tell you that whenever I attempt to repeat this story, to relive that moment, it is exceedingly was called Das Kleine Lager, a small camp that was reserved especially for the brutal treatment of Jews. I went into those barracks, and there I saw just raw planks of wood, shelves on which were strewn scraggly, stinking straw sacks. And there they were, looking down at me. Men, a few boys. There were no women in Buchenwald. But I will never forget those eyes, haunted with fear, half-crazed, emaciated, more dead than alive. Spontaneously, intuitively, I felt the only language that I could speak that most of them would understand was Yiddish. And I called out, Shalom Aleichem, Yidden, ihr seid frei. You are free, the war is over. And there they were looking out at me through incredulous eyes. But again, I can't continue. I could go on, but from that moment I must tell you that my life changed. The impact of that experience was enormous on the whole course of my career.
Yeah.
You can put up the images from the email.
As I mentioned, we're privileged this evening. First of all, thank you for showing that video. And I never rushed after that I heard your father's voice. And I feel like knowing you, that he speaks through you. I wasn't going to introduce you first, but I'm doing that right now. And I really say it on behalf of myself and Rabbi Kurtz. We were at 613. I can give, by the way, Rabbi Schacter's biography is really long. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'll just say this, and then on a personal note. Rabbi Schacter is the university professor of Jewish history and Jewish thought and senior scholar at the Center for the Jewish Future at Yeshiva University. He also, where I got to know Rabbi Schacter well, was when he was dean of the Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik Institute in Boston, where we learned, and as Rabbi Kurtz said, you haven't changed much, where you're always changing. But we come into a class with Rabbi Schacter, you give us a big book of sources and say, study them and learn. But on a personal level, I know that your father lives in you and through you, and you're a person who's deeply admired by so many people, not only for your intellect, but for your neshama, your heart. And Hashem should bless you and your family, continued growth, both b'chachma, but also b'chesed. And it's truly a privilege to have you here this evening, sharing some thoughts about your father, a blessed memory. After Rabbi Schacter speaks, we're also blessed to have with us Dr. Rafael Medoff, who's an American professor of Jewish history and the founding director of the David Wyman Institute for Holocaust Studies, based in Washington, D.C. He focuses on issues related to America's response to the Holocaust. He's also the author, of course, of the book this evening, Rabbi Buchenwald, and wish you much success in all of your journeys and discoveries to help bring history to life and to help all of us help navigate the future better together. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Cohen. Thank you for inviting us to come. And thank you for your gracious introduction. Bershus Mara the Asra, Rabbi Cohen. I know that you know how blessed you are to have such an extraordinary rabbi for now close to 2 decades, or somewhere around 2 decades, and counting. I consider Rabbi Cohen to be one of the most effective, forward-looking, wise rabbis in America. And I know a lot of rabbis in America. I look up to him for his wisdom and for his dedication to you. He thinks about you, he's thinking about you all the time, and has become a leader, not only within the Stanford community, within this congregation and beyond, but across the American Jewish community. And Kodesh Baruch Hu should give you, and I see Diane is here as well, I don't know, Rebbitzin, not Rebbitzin, not Rebbitzin, never Rebbitzin, Diane. It's really, and thank you for coming and for being who you are and what you are and what you do. And you should both have wonderful years together, to have massive nachas from your extraordinary family and from one another. I want to acknowledge Rabbi Kurtz, Rabbi Moshe Kurtz, one of my most beloved and long-standing students. We were together for 3 years. He was in a class of mine that I teach at Yeshiva University. And not too many of my students stay for 3 years, but Rabbi Kurtz did, and this is his first year out, and I miss him very much. You're blessed. You're multiply blessed in this congregation. A young man who has an incredible future, who writes, who's disciplined, who's a Talmud Chacham and thinking. It's extraordinary. One rabbi writing, following another rabbi writing. You're blessed. You're very blessed, and I'm really humbled to be here in the presence of my two very, very special friends. I'm also humbled because I'm in the shadow of my father. Zachrono Livracha, my father started here in this shul. His first pulpit was in Stamford, Connecticut, in Agudas Shalom. He came in 1941. He came trying out for a job. He did not yet have rabbinic ordination. And he got the job, and thank God he got rabbinic ordination, and stayed here for a little while, and then decided that he was going to leave, as hard as it was for him to go into the army. I'm going to leave a lot of the specific details of his life to Professor Medoff, and I do want to say that the book that he wrote about my father is an exceptionally extraordinary one. Our family, my sister and I, wanted to remember our father in a way that was meaningful, and didn't just want to have someone write a whitewash, wonderful biography about how great he was, but who would be able to see the unfolding of the events of 20th century American and world Jewry through the prism of his experiences. And he touched many, many important events, both in the United States, Israel, and beyond, that unfolded in the 20th century. And we turned to Dr. Medoff, and my sister and I, and my late mother, the three of us were absolutely and continue to be enthralled and thrilled and grateful to Dr. Medoff for the extraordinary, extraordinary work that you did on this book. Left no stone unturned in terms of all the research. And I'm going to say that it reads like a symphony. He's such a gift as a writer. It's gripping. It's a gripping story. And there are a lot of really interesting stories. So, buy the book. He'll be happy to sign. And thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Really, really an honor to be here. We gathered tonight, not coincidentally, there's no such thing as a coincidence, but today was Kristallnacht, and we focus on the Holocaust on Kristallnacht, and tomorrow is Veterans Day. So we have a confluence, we're right sandwiched in between Kristallnacht and Veterans Day, and what better time to focus on someone whose career was launched in the context of trying to help Jews in the Shoah and the Holocaust, and who fought in the United States Army, who was a veteran. And I'd like to frame my brief remarks in those contexts. My father said on the video that you heard, the YouTube, that when he came into Buchenwald, he was in the frontline troops of General Patton in the Third Army. He very much wanted to go to fight. I'll come back to that in a moment. And he finally got himself overseas and ended up frontline troops moving into Germany, through Germany, and ended up on April 11th, 1945, poised to enter into the Buchenwald concentration camp. This was not in Poland, this was in Germany. And when he came in, we heard this story many, many times as children growing up. I have one sister, my sister and I, she's 20 months younger than I am. About how he came in and he was able to connect to the survivors because of his Yiddish. My father was the youngest of 10 children. His parents were in their 40s and 50s when he was born. And he lost a number of older siblings who died. My grandparents buried 5 of their 10 children. This is tetanus, this is sickness, this is ill health, this is a world in 1917, lost a child in the flu epidemic. And he was the apple of their eye. They poured a lot into him. And he grew up in a European household. My Zayde had a langa board and a big yarmulke, a big round yarmulke. He was a Schacter, a ritual slaughterer. Our name is Schacter. Some people get their name from the shtetl they lived in. There's no town called Shechet. So we are called Schacter because my grandfather was the 7th generation, Ben Achar Ben, of Schacter. That's what he did. That's what our family did. My father broke the chain. He was the first one in 8 generations, like 200 years, who decided not to be a shochet, and he went into the rabbinate. My grandparents came to the United States. 1907, my grandfather arrived. He was a shochet. He went to Manchester, New Hampshire. That's where he got a job in 1907. A couple of my aunts were born in Manchester. My father told me that his father got a nickel for every animal that he slaughtered and a penny for every chicken that he slaughtered, and that's what he lived on in Manchester, New Hampshire. But it's a very European traditional family. My father knew Yiddish. He grew up with Yiddish. And so he comes into the concentration camps. He's an American guy wearing an American uniform, and they're looking at him, and they don't know what to make of him. They see the luchot, the 10 Commandments on the uniform, the chaplain. That was what the chaplain wore to identify himself as a chaplain, and they couldn't figure out up from down because 7 hours ago a uniform meant torture, starvation, death, horror. And now a uniform marches in, and he says, "Was kenachtan?" And he started by saying, "Yidden sind frei." When my father died in March of 2013, his obituary appeared on the front page of the New York Times. And the title of the obituary was "Jews, You Are Free." He went, as you will hear, he went on for a have illustrious career in many areas of the Jewish communal work. This was a launching pad. And Professor Medoff makes the point how Buchenwald really was the crucible that shaped the rest of his life. But it was that experience that was most formidable for him and for my sister and for me growing up. So I want to speak from the perspective of a son. It was not easy being the son of such a prominent father. Those of you who are children, and all of us are children, we all have parents. Hopefully we still do. So hopefully we are parents and we have children or grandchildren. So we know that the avoda, the work of a child, is to try to differentiate themselves from their parents. On the one hand, we want to be connected to our parents, but we also want to differentiate ourselves. What makes me different? What space can I occupy in the world that's not occupied by my parents? And for me, it was particularly difficult because my father occupied such a huge space. As I grew older, it was easier for me because I began to identify more with what it was that he had accomplished in very powerful and significant ways. And the narrative of my childhood was hearing the stories of his Holocaust experience and hearing them not from him, but from survivors who used to come to our house. Our home was a clearinghouse for Holocaust survivors who came, who had nothing, whose lives my father, mamish, literally saved, who pulled them out of absolute despair and physical destruction and gave them a life and gave them hope and gave them something to aspire to. And we heard from them, many of them who came to our house, Shabbos, Yom Tov, what our father meant to them. And this was so centrally significant for us. I'm going to tell you one story and then read 2 parts of books. My father in 1956, I'm assuming that Dr. Medoff will talk about this, was in a group of, the first group of American rabbis to penetrate into the Iron Curtain. The head of your adult education committee comes, and her illustrious and beloved husband come from Russia. And then it wasn't Russia, then I don't know what it was called, USSR. And in 1956, since 1917, there were no American rabbis who were allowed into Russia, and my father was a member of the delegation. And I was 6 years old. I was born in December of 1950. It's now the summer of 56. I wasn't even 6 years old. I was 5 years old. And we're in these bungalow colony where we used to go every summer. Well, my mother, my sister, and me, and our father used to join us. He had off from his congregation, and he'd run back for Shabbos once in a while. But this was a time when we would be together, and then all of a sudden, Vi is Tati. I only spoke Yiddish till I was 5 years old. I did not actually understand one single word of English until I was 5 years old. My parents made a concerted effort to speak to me and my sister only in Yiddish, because this would be our calling card. Now that I'm older, I connect very intensely with a lot of different kinds of Jews because I can speak Yiddish to them. So I said to Mommy, Vi is Tati. And I'm waking up and I'm not seeing my father. I'm 5 years old, I don't know what's going on. And I remember vividly, 5 years old, my mother said to me, Tati is gegangen helfen Jiden. Which means Tati, my father, he went to help Jews. And all of a sudden okay, I got it now. You know, like we used to have a expression in English like the dime drop. We don't have no idea. I tell my students the dime drop. They have no idea what I'm talking about, but some of you may remember. And all of a sudden, like, oh yeah, okay, that's okay. 5 years old, Tati's good, gonna have for you. And that was his mantra, and that became the mantra for myself and for my sister, with all of the complexity of growing up in that household. At the end of the day, we feel that that's an important way to spend one's life. We were so taken by this that on his matzeva, on his tombstone, it's written, engraved, is gegangen helfen Jiden, in Yiddish, on his tombstone in Beth David Cemetery in Elmont, New York. Is gegangen helfen Jiden. What greater kavod can we give to him for that? But he devoted himself, as you'll hear, not just to helping Eden, but on behalf of America. My father was an incredibly proud American patriot and fought for America, not just for Jews. Two brief stories and I'm done. I don't know if you know the name Martin Greenfield. So if you're a feinschmecker wearing fancy suits, you should know the name Martin Greenfield. For a couple of $1,000, you could also have the suit that Martin Greenfield made. He's a very prominent, I wouldn't say tailor, but suit maker. And he published a autobiography, and he's got pictures in here with every single president, I think beginning with Truman. And he provides suits to presidents of the United States, to very fancy people. And he's an extraordinary human being, Measure of a Man. It's an interesting title for a tailor or a suit maker. A measure of a man, from Auschwitz survivor to president's tailor. He told me that I developed a relationship with him. He gave me a copy of the book. He told me that he used to slip into the pocket of the suits that he would give to the president, be good to the Jews. You know, like, help Israel. He'd stick it in the pocket and give him the suit. And they pull it out of the pocket and, hopefully, who knows, supposedly, hopefully made a difference. So I met Martin. He told me about my father, tremendous impact on him, and I want to read a little bit from his book. So my father had ran this service. That's the cover of Dr. Medoff's book. We don't know exactly when it happened, but very shortly after the liberation, a major service in Buchenwald. And the next day, Martin, who was a survivor, was a young boy in Buchenwald, writes and describes that service. There was singing, reciting of blessings, prayer, much weeping. I remember my father described the Kaddish. It's the first time these people say Kaddish. And you can, I can't even imagine, but you can imagine that you're imagining what that was like. It was very moving. The next day, Rabbi Schacter was mulling around outside the Czech barracks. In Yiddish, he says, "Sind du apo Yidden? Wie kann ich gefunden Yidden? Are there any Jews around here?" So I said, "Yeah, ich can Yiddish. Let me try to help you. Where are the Jews?" So I told him, and I'm reading now, this is the Czech barracks. I'm one of the few Jews here. I see. Rabbi, I attended your service last night. It was very beautiful, but may I please ask you a question? Of course, he said. Rabbi, I must know, where was God? Where was God? I mean, that's like the most core, elementary, gut-wrenching, overwhelming, impossible question. This is the day after the davening. My father told me that at that service, some guy got up in the back and started screaming in the middle, screaming hysterically. And so, welche Gott davens die? So the God was hat reingeworfen dein Mom and Tat in crematoria? Which God are you praying for? He's singing Adon Olam, he's singing Yigdal. Who are you praying to? That the God who threw your mother and father into the crematoria, in Yiddish, it's also crematoria. What are you going to say? The next day, little Martin, I have to ask you a question. Where was God? He stood still and silent. Look what happened. I pleaded. Where was God? Where? There are no answers to certain questions, he said, staring off in the distance. This is a question for which there is no answer. I lowered my head and cried. Rabbi Schacter wrapped his arms around me and held me. It's not the end of the story. This is in 1945. In 1985, the Holocaust Museum in Washington is dedicated in the Reagan administration. My father was a very prominent chaplain and Holocaust liberator. He was invited to be a guest speaker. Martin Greenfield, a Chashav Yid, made a big donation, I'm sure, to the Holocaust Museum. He's invited to come to be in the VIP section. And he writes 40 years later. During the ceremony, an old rabbi got up to make some remarks. I said to Martin, he wasn't that old. An old rabbi got up to make some remarks. His face looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. I know that rabbi from somewhere, I whispered to our lead. The rabbi continued speaking. He explained that he had witnessed the Nazi atrocities of the Holocaust firsthand as a chaplain in the U.S. Third Army, which liberated Buchenwald. No way, I thought,